Hi, everyone. I'm Mariangela Maguire, and you're listening to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. Thanks for joining me today. So a couple of weeks ago, a listener asked me to do a show about mindfulness practices during this particularly difficult political season. And I agree with her, it's a great topic. And I know I've struggled as the election nears to maintain my equanimity and an attitude of loving kindness and compassion. So I thought it best to ask for some help. And my friend, Professor Craig Gingrich-Philbrook from the Performance Studies program and the Department of Communication Studies at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, agreed to join me for this conversation. Craig, welcome back to the show.
It's nice to be here, as always.
Good. Thank you for this. I know this is a topic you and I talk about offline. It has been very challenging, and so I'm glad to have you with me today as we approach this topic. So folks, the show's purpose is to really help people in their mindfulness journey. And one of the things I mentioned last week is that you might use the show itself, the time that you spend listening to the show, as a kind of meditative experience for you, a time when, if at all possible, you just do this. You just listen to the show and allow yourself to relax and recharge. You might bring a notebook and a pen because something we talk about may resonate with you and you might want to write it down. And I'm confident that I might say something, I know Craig will, that is so clever and insightful that you're going to want to write it down. And I think both of us will have ideas about recommendations for things that you might want to read or listen to related to this topic. So we do these mindfulness practices because they bring peace and greater inner peace. And that's an important thing, because if we have more peace within ourselves, that allows us to bring more peace into the world, which is, of course, exactly why we're talking about this topic, is that there is perhaps too little peace in the world. So I think that all of us can agree, regardless of our what's happening in our lives or our political beliefs, that bringing more peace into the world is something to value and strive for. Rodney Smith says, it doesn't require simply a special environment or particular practices, but that the capacity to reach mindfulness, to reach what he might call the Buddha nature, is within all activities, all reactions, all thought, all emotional responses. It's right here where we are. There's an opportunity for us. So first, in order to do something that will enhance mindfulness, bring us back into our bodies, we're going to do a short breathing exercise. Craig, will you join me in this?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so we do these breathing exercises because they help us focus, they help us relax, they help us to be more clear. And I encourage you to pause at the top of the inhalation to try to make your exhalation longer than the inhalation. And we're going to use a strategy that Laurie Cameron, who's a mindfulness educator, calls 3 deep breaths. So the first breath, we just try to pay attention and notice the sensation of the air entering and exiting our body. For the second breath, we try to notice any place in our body where we feel tension and relax. And then for the third breath, we want to set our intention for this moment, not for the rest of our lives, but for just right now. What do we need right now to be present? So breath number 1, just pay attention to our breathing. Breath number 2, relax. And breath number 3, set your intention for this moment. Thanks for joining me with that and that. Thanks, Craig, for joining me. So we're talking today about mindfulness during a fraught political season that's happening in the midst of a worldwide pandemic that's having a devastating impact on people's health and well-being, that's inflicting enormous economic suffering. as well as witnessing catastrophic damage to our environment through our own bad practices, but also most immediately through forest fires and floods and hurricanes. And I'm sad to say that's a partial list of what's happening in the world right now that is of concern to so many of us, to all of us in one way or another. So Craig, that's a long list. I'm not sure I could have done this alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
lot, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, I think, sometimes paradoxically, one of the things that can be the most difficult is that to try to find some kind of position of peace from which to act, which
Mm-hmm.
is, I guess, part of the way that I've been trying to conceptualize it lately. One also doesn't want to forget anything. And
Right.
I think for some of us who are, I'm, as an educator, and I'm often in the classroom with a variety of different people. And so it's important whenever we're kind of doing stock taking of the moment to be sure that we're not leaving anything out.
Right.
And so that is, that's honorable work. And at the same time, it is a lot
It's
to
a
take
lot.
in. And I think
Yeah.
it's reasonable that people would spend some time reflecting on how they are doing that and sharing those ways of working, with each other.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. And we've talked a little bit about focusing initially today on how are we managing things sort of internally within ourselves, where our mind goes during these difficult times. We're going to also talk then about, and these things are nested, they're not really separate from each other, but we're going to conceptualize them a little bit separately for our purposes today. How do we deal with our relationships with others? Because these challenges have an impact on our relationships with other people. And then finally, what's the impact on our relationship with the broader world, the social world, that all of us share and that we're all a part of, regardless of how we see that. That's just kind of a fundamental truth. All these things are connected. We're all connected, and we're all connected to the greater world. So I just want to say, and I'm curious about how you've been thinking about this, as this day of this having this conversation has drawn nearer, I have actually, I feel worse than ever. I don't know if I was thinking about the show and trying to be more on top of the news,
Mm-hmm.
or the news has gotten worse or more difficult or more stressful, or it's just the election getting nearer, or the surge in COVID cases, or I don't know. But I'm struggling today, and my mind's going in a lot of different places. What about you? How are you dealing with things? How's it
The
going?
same, really the same. I spent some time yesterday basically with the feelings of who am I to be talking about this at this moment? I can, here I am just trying to do the dishes and, to do the dishes. But my mind's going in 100 different directions. And I feel like, I said to Johnny, my partner, the other day, I feel like my executive function has been beaten up and is numb.
Oh,
And you know, and I think that in a way, all the more reason,
mm,
at one level. And to be able to have this conversation with you, with whom I've had, practically, you know, every important conversation in my life, about the
yes.
things that are important in my life,
Mm,
feels like it is an example of how we maintain relationships in these times and the
right,
good that that can do. And so I'm resting in not having to have all of the answers, not
right.
having to, and being present in this moment with you.
Mhm. I think that last phrase before the present in the moment with you is really an important one. I think that's one of the things that creates so much tension and internal anxiety, is that sense of I've got to have all the answers. I've got to understand everything that's happening, and I've got to be on top of all the news, the information, the opinions, the research, as well as the opinions. I have to see the big picture, and I have to understand it. And that's not possible, is it?
No, no,
Right.
it's an inflationary impulse, right?
Ah, I love that
So
phrase.
I think, we've talked, I think, before, in my previous time about how much the ideas of Kristen Langelier and Eric Peterson with regard to the creative double bind,
Mhm.
have influenced me.
Mhm.
And so I always think about the one between inflation and ambition. I want to
Ah,
be able to do good work,
right.
but I also don't want to think that I'm, the savior of every moment. Okay. And so trying to find that balance.
Hmm.
One.
Right. I want to be, and if I put it in this context of the politics, I want to be informed. I want to be a good citizen,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's important to me to, when I vote, that I know what I'm doing and that
Mm-hmm.
I'm civically engaged. That's what my education was about, right? That's values in my family, etc. At the same time, I am not responsible for absolutely every outcome of every election of, right?
No,
Yes, I'm
no.
not the savior.
Yeah. And as they start to seem more and more dire,
Mhm.
to the degree that we've become as a country sort of more and more polarized,
Mhm.
I think that just sort of raises that tension. And so thinking, on this kind of individual and relational and national level
Mhm.
about not just what we're doing, if what we're doing is right, but the degree to which it is accelerating or decelerating that polarization.
Oh.
And in ways that are responsible and not
Mhm.
merely kind of sort of like
Reactive.
false, all the
Yeah.
kinds of things that people might say, caving in, giving
Right.
too much, not maintaining our boundaries, some of those sorts of
Okay. Well, that's
things.
an important thing because it brings the self into the relationship with the other, because there is a sense of being judged and who's watching me, who's making that judgment about whether I'm doing the right thing or not.
Mhm.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to move from this idea of what is happening to us internally, what might be some things we can do. We might start there. What can we do to be more calm ourselves? But then also, what's the impact of all of this on our relationships with other people? So you're listening to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio, and we'll be right back. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I realize I haven't said this before when you've been on this show, Craig, or at least I don't think I did. But that charming music that you hear at the beginning and end of my show, and as we come in and out of the breaks, that was written by my friend Craig Gingrich-Philbrook. So thank you, Craig. I really love that music.
Yes.
So we are talking today about the fact that the election is coming near. It is I don't know. I hesitate to use that language of the most important or the most difficult or the most fraught in my lifetime, because I was around when Richard Nixon was elected, and there was a sense that that was also momentous. And so I don't like that. That language doesn't help me feel calm, but it is important. It wouldn't matter who was
Mhm.
running for office. It's important. Any election is important, but we are living in, and what I do think are uniquely difficult times with the pandemic, with the environmental crises we're seeing all around us that are having immediate impact on everyone. And with the racial reckoning that was this kind of newly at the top of mind for so many people, and in both difficult and very positive ways. So we're talking initially today about what's the impact on the self, and Craig, I'd like you to talk a little bit about how do you're a news person, you keep up with current events, and you've kind of put this in the context of, as a teacher, you have some social obligation with your students to understand what's happening in the world.
Mhm.
And so what do you do to manage the intensity of the information coming at us, or the intensity of the feelings in response to what's going on in the larger world?
Yeah. Well, I think, um, part of it, I think, is to be students of our own mind, as you
Mhm.
say,
Right.
and in a way to think about what, sort of what are the conditions that sort of help to construct our psyches, our personalities, however one wants to language that,
Hmm.
our um, our tendencies, right? The things that we learned to do, but that um, may have outlived their usefulness,
Ah, okay.
become maladaptive. And
Hmm.
so to kind of always sort of be crafting. So um, the self and those habits of response,
Right,
right?
right.
And so I think, if I try to think about, well, what what is impacting me sort of in some senses the most, and in the, where I sort of feel the least stable,
Okay.
at some level, in relationship to my own past. And that has, that certainly has to do with the way that the administration has just kind of gone about dismantling LGBTQ plus rights in
Right.
every way that it can,
Mhm.
while at the same time saying, I'm the most, I'm the most gay friendly administration
Right.
ever. These ludicrous claims, that for me resonate with a sense of, being told that my, you know, um, mother loved me
Mhm.
while also not allowing me to come home from college for Christmas because the man she was married to at the time said I was rubbing it in their faces. This
Right.
kind of back and
Right.
forth absurdity.
Mhm.
And so, certainly we hear a lot about how, the marriage equality being under threat.
Mhm.
And we had the two justices
Mhm.
come out, and so, so the
Right.
discourse is out there. It's not
Right.
overreacting to be concerned about that.
You're not reading it
But
into something.
right,
Right.
right.
It
It's
said,
not,
yeah.
oh, crazy
Yeah.
liberals, right? They said it.
Right. They said it.
They said what they said,
Right.
right? When someone shows you, who they are, believe them.
Mhm.
And so I think, but the force that I bring to it doesn't have to be that sort of injured young person.
Ah, okay.
And even though he you, that sort of inner
Yep.
Craig gets, you know it feels like a jolt of electricity and danger
Okay.
and adrenaline and all of that. So I have taken to reminding myself that I don't feel like I am godless, right? I mean, I have a long history as in Baptist childhood,
Mhm.
and that has morphed into this sort of I'm a child of the universe, kind
Right.
of
Right.
where I feel like I speak to the collective consciousness,
Right.
or whatever,
Mhm.
at least as at least as a dialogic figure
Mhm.
to remind me of my connection to other people. And so, I don't think that my marriage is less than the Pence's marriage,
Right.
for
Right.
example.
Mhm.
I don't think that it cheapens their marriage.
Mhm.
Um, they may, but I don't.
Mhm.
And that also asks me to remember that the fact that that Johnny and I are married doesn't mean that our relationship is more than people who haven't made that choice or who
Right.
think about marriage in a kind of critical register,
Mhm.
as an institution that they don't want to participate in because of its history,
Right.
and so on. And so to just try to center, in some senses,
Mhm.
my feelings about that, so that I don't have to take on, with the risk, the worldview
Mhm.
of the people who are creating this risky condition. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I don't have to think about me the way that Pence does,
Right.
right?
Right. Mhm.
Um, and in order to act, right? And you know,
Mhm.
talk to family about
Mhm.
what that risk is,
Mhm.
when that feels appropriate to do. And I think I also am working to then kind of manage my exposure to catastrophizing news stories, right?
Okay.
So we know that the internet, it just sort of escalates the desire to grab our
Right.
attention and shake us. And so headlines are often way more um, dire than the actual story.
Right.
And research tells us that people will often trade those internet stories without actually reading them based upon the emotional connection to those headlines. And so trying to kind of manage my exposure to that catastrophizing discourse is one of the things that I'm doing.
Mhm. And I want to go back to the first part of what you said because it just is such a great description, and I think of staying present, but also staying in your own body,
Mhm.
right? Not allowing yourself, by sort of recognizing where does what is this fear about? What is it connected to? How is it related to fears I have felt in the past? Am I still that vulnerable 19-year-old?
Yeah,
No, right, right here, right now, you're safe.
right.
And I really think that's such an important thing. Also, the idea that if I if I allow that emotional response and the fear, especially the fear-based one of my rights being eroded, to take over in this moment when my rights are not actually at risk, when I personally am okay, that I am putting myself in that kind of space where I am judging myself by somebody else's feelings and standards and ideology, and that's an ugly thing, right? That can make me feel really bad about myself, and I don't need to be in a space where I'm either saying I'm better than or I'm worse than, right? I just am. I'm enough just as I am, right? That thing I love to say that the mindfulness people talk about, right? I am enough just as I am. And so I neither have to denigrate somebody else, nor I have to take their ideological negativity towards me into myself.
Mhm.
So I think that's so you, and then you also limit your exposure to catastrophic news. So my question is, because I do that too, although this week I just sometimes it's like eating candy, and I just overexpose myself to it for whatever reason. I sometimes it's like it's just falling off some kind of commitment I've made to myself, right? So that happens, and I don't have to be mean to myself about it. But do
Yeah.
you ever worry that you're being naive?
Well, I I know that I'm naive in the sense that
Oh.
I know that naivete
Mhm.
is a persistent part of the human condition.
Oh,
There are things that I do not know.
okay.
I may not know that I know them. I I have to produce a positive enough picture of the world in order to operate in it. So at some level, it's always there. The question is, how much sway do I give it?
Mm,
Right? And do I and do I use it as a cudgel to beat up other people
mm,
who are being critical and responsive to the world, right?
okay.
Because I don't want to do that. I don't want to say to them, "Oh, it's all going to work out," because, you know, um, it may not,
And it
right?
won't for everyone. Yeah.
Right, right.
Right.
And it isn't now, right? There are kids in
Right.
cages now. The
Right.
world is disintegrating environmentally now.
Right.
Orangutans are going extinct
Now.
now.
Yeah.
This is happening, right? It's in process.
Okay.
Um, so
All right. Well, that brings us really to that sense then of how do we, because we have these conversations, you and I have known each other a long time. We used to call this an interpersonal communication, person building conversations, right? You and I can have person building conversations because there's a lot of level of knowledge and trust. But we interact, all of us, with people throughout the day and in our own families, on the internet, etc., where we're not really going to have the same perspective on this. So how do we put ourselves in those spaces without doing harm to ourselves or others? That's the question we're going to talk about when we come back from our break. So you're listening to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I hope you'll join us right after the break. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I'm here today with my guest, Craig Gingrich-Philbrook, and we are talking about maintaining mindfulness in this very difficult political season. And we've been talking about ways that we both have worked on managing our intake of news, for instance, managing our expectations of ourselves, of what we can consume, what we can control, in order to have a more peaceful inner life so that we can act with a sense of purpose. To bring more peace into our lives during this time is not in order to be still and motionless, but to be able to act from a place of clarity and confidence. So that's the first part of our conversation, and now we're really moving into that question of other people and the challenges. I noticed this on Facebook. So I just joined Facebook a few months ago, and I definitely am aware that I exist in a very particular bubble of people who've never met each other, but I happen to know who post the same things on Facebook. That always makes me kind of laugh, but also says, okay, yeah, I'm in touch with a kind of a probably narrow slice of humanity. But there are people in my family whose politics are the opposite of mine, and sometimes that can be very hurtful. You and I, Craig, have talked about people whose politics maybe you might think of us on the same side of the aisle, but their position is different from yours, even within that. And all of that provides so much opportunity for judgment, for judging ourselves in relationship to them, for judging them and their beliefs. I think it creates a lot of anxiety for people. How are you thinking about that aspect of this?
As carefully as I can.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, we've been talking about my. I'm kind of in the middle of Brene Brown's book, "Braving the Wilderness,"
Mm-hmm.
and one of the sort of axioms, if you will, or principles that she has is that it's hard to hate people up close.
Right.
And to think about just how I conceptualize sort of people on the other side of the aisle.
Mm-hmm.
And you can think about that at some level just sort of very simply. So um, yesterday I was sitting in the car outside of the Burger King because I was doing some shopping, and it was time for grocery shopping and time to have some food. So there I am with my Impossible Burger sitting
Yeah.
in my car, looking at the place across the street, and I see this man kind of get out of his car, and I'm like, he doesn't have a mask on. Right?
Uh-huh.
I get all
Gotcha.
judgy, and I think some of that's coming just from my own fear about being
Right.
out in the world, and maybe also guilt about being out in the world rather than
Right.
at home, right? And
Yep. Right.
trying to justify my decision to go out into the world by being the one who does it right.
Yeah.
And I see him get about halfway to the door and go, and go back to the car
Right.
and get his mask.
Yeah.
I know. And so just like in that
Yeah.
little
Absolutely.
tiny bit, I'm
Mm-hmm.
all up in it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
and making all kinds of decisions about who he is and what he thinks and what he values, and using
Mm-hmm.
that to and I try not to do that.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
just sort of as a rule, I don't go around trying to take stock of everybody's life. But there I was, and I think because I was in the condition of my own fear.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'd encountered
Right.
a couple of people out in the world that day without masks, and it, it frightens me. I mean, that's really the only.
Sure.
It just does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's one thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just trying to observe. As you said in earlier episodes, when you're kind of talking about trying to kind of move out of that place of judgment
Right.
all the time,
Mm-hmm.
that mechanism that is a part of being aware of it is a part of the mindfulness journey,
Yes.
right? Here we are in this time where we're constantly making judgments about people politically. What a wonderful opportunity to learn how to observe that happening on the hoof,
Right.
and
Right.
to attempt to intervene in it
Mm-hmm.
purposefully.
Right. So I think this goes back to the naivete thing, because I find myself, I go back and forth on this quite a bit. I can bring myself to that awareness and say, okay, I noticed somebody on Facebook who never posts anything about politics or the social world. It's only ever pictures of family and friends, and and everybody else is all busy talking about politics. So I might jump into a judgment about, is this person just, what are they thinking, right? There's so much going on, and all they're posting are these kind of family pictures. But I can notice that, and I can, just as you did with the man yesterday, and maybe I can slow down, and maybe I can ask myself, is there really anything wrong with that? And what's the impact on me? And I can let go of that judgment. Um, but I think sometimes that the naivete can come in, or that feeling of it, and I thought about this with Brene Brown's conversation about it's hard to hate people up close, and she encourages, asking questions instead of saying to somebody, well, you're wrong, and here are your 12 reasons why. Say, tell me more about why you think that. Tell me what that means, this language means to you, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to put my hands on my hips, but you can't tell. They never do that for me. They don't ask me what I think, right?
Right.
Why do I always have to be the one who's the bigger person, right? Well, I have to, what do you think about that? Do you ever feel that way?
Oh, all the time. If I take the risk though and ask them how
Mm-hmm.
they feel,
Mm-hmm.
um, the moment is better. The
Mm,
conversation is better.
mm-hmm.
I learn things about them that can help me connect.
Yep.
I suppose the sophist might say that I can use against them,
Yeah.
right? And
Right.
sort of show how
Yeah.
their argument falls
Uh-huh.
apart. But that's a really bad impulse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it I've been trying to kind of get to grips with the boomerang effect in persuasion, so that idea, it's broader than this, but in contemporary terms, it's sometimes used to talk about when you give people good factual information that contests their worldview,
Mm-hmm.
you can paradoxically strengthen their worldview.
Right.
And at least in theory, that's because they feel like their freedom to have that view is being taken away.
Right.
And so latch onto it that much
Mm-hmm.
more because it's about being able to make up their own mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that, it's sort of that quality. If I decide that I'm not going to be the patsy
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not going to take that chance,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even though they don't do it for me, right?
Right.
Um, uh, my life is still impoverished,
Right.
and sometimes the more so.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Um, and I don't know what they're going to do, 2, 3 weeks, months, years from now,
Mm-hmm.
when and if they ever kind of hit the equal sign on that, you know, social exchange theory calculator and say, oh, Craig was always kind of interested in what I was thinking, and I never was interested in him. I'm gonna go visit him in the home and ask him how he's feeling. Like it doesn't have to be that in order
Right.
for my effort on behalf of the moment to
Mm-hmm.
have been valuable, or to have been good for me, just me,
Right.
you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think that to to get involved in that thinking of why do I have to be the bigger person is to be in a comparative place, in a place of judgment, right? I don't actually know if the other person, I have an older brother whose our politics are quite the opposite. Does he feel he's listened to me, even though I don't know, and I
Yeah.
haven't asked him that, right?
Yeah.
I feel I've listened to him, but I don't know what he thinks, and so what's the point? I think you make a great point about what's the value to me of being in that place of judgment, in that moment of withholding my own capacity for humility and humanity in
Mhm.
that moment. It does me no good,
Yeah.
and that's not the same as being passive. It's not the same as um, accepting and agreeing with people with whom I don't agree. Right. I
Yeah.
think that's sometimes where, but I also can notice how afraid of am I in that moment. I think it so often comes back to fear, and it has several times in our conversation today. What is driving my desire to sort of punch back is my own fear more than probably anything the other person is doing or saying. So it's tough. I also thought maybe you would talk a little bit about this in the Brene Brown book. One of the things she says is, in a sense, it's okay to step away and
Oh,
say,
sure.
right, I'm not going to engage this,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm not having to judge myself in relationship to you all the time. If I say I'm not going to engage with that, then I can also say I'm not going to engage necessarily
Mhm.
in a big contest of wills about who's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think anytime we can moderate our impulse to try to be absolute or final,
Mm, that's a nice way to look at it.
that's good,
Yeah.
because the moment is certainly there are absolute and final moments,
Hmm.
right? Um, but situations aren't always and only absolute and final. It is okay to step away. It is okay to step back. It is okay to step away. It's okay to, be as relationally hokey pokey about it as you want to, right? And
Yeah.
at one level,
Hmm.
because orienting to a decision and a relationship kind of from almost like a kind of from a policy perspective, right? I will never,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
There is a place for that, right?
Hmm.
I will
Right.
never engage that abusive partner again. I will
Right.
never,
Yes.
whatever that might be. Good, right? There
Right.
has to be room for that,
Hmm.
but everything doesn't have to be at that level,
Right.
right? And I think sometimes but it is okay. It's important even to experiment with that, right?
Hmm.
So, I've been doing a lot of thinking about friends and family that I cut off after the last election
Hmm.
because of what I took to be ugly things that they said,
Hmm.
you know? And I know why I did that at the time.
Hmm.
It felt like boundary making. It
Right.
felt like solidarity with friends,
Hmm. Right.
with identities that they were demonizing or at least not taking seriously,
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Hmm.
there's a continuum there,
Yeah.
you know, to,
Hmm.
to some degree. But again, one wants to be very careful
Yeah.
about giving latitude to, you know, some word like evil,
Mhm.
destructive, destructive beliefs, right?
Right. Right.
Dehumanizing beliefs. Right.
Dehumanizing.
If I'm kind of in the midst of Brown's description of dehumanizing right now, and it's
Hmm.
a good one,
Is it? Hmm.
Um, and so I think it's okay to want to step away from being dehumanized or people who dehumanize others, right?
Hmm.
Um, and and it's important to do so, and maybe also to give them some grace if that also feels right,
Hmm.
and potentially, because we live life without guarantee, be disappointed.
Right. Right. And I think for me, this is where the mindfulness practice is so critical because it is a discernment process and a continuous discernment process, right? If the more I know my own mind, the more I know if I'm in the presence of my mind kind of running away with me, of being in a place of reactivity and judgment, and at the same time, sort of clenching and holding on to an interaction with someone else that is not in my best interest, not in their best interest. It's my ego. It's punishing me. It's, if you think about some of the ideology around family, right? That we can never, that it's always evil and wrong to end a relationship with a family member. I just don't believe that. And when I'm in the presence of something that's tearing me apart, but I'm doing it because this voice says, this is what a good sister does, this is what a good child does, then that's my cue. Hey, wait a minute, right? Wait a minute. Let me step back from this. Let me step back from the way in which my sense of self is really on the line and endangered by these interactions. And it doesn't mean you have, like, as you said, are saying it, sometimes you have to slam a door. Sometimes you can close a door quietly and say, and I have said this to people, I love you, but I can't be in this conversation with you. I love you, but I can't be in this conversation with you. And that to me is quietly closing the door. And it's not locking it, but it is closing it and saying, I'm paying attention to my internal self and my authentic self and what I need in this moment. So to me, that's what, because otherwise we do get kind of swept up, or we just shove all those emotions down and are at war with ourselves about these other relationships, as opposed to coming to some place of clarity where we either engage and draw closer, tell me more about what you think, or where we quietly close the door and say, no, I love you, but not right
Mhm.
now. So, yeah.
And I think when we do that, when we
Mm-hmm.
do close that door,
Mm-hmm.
we have to not harass ourselves for having done so.
Right. Right. Exactly. We have
And
to
if we
let that
find
be okay.
ourselves walking around, and if we close it, we should close it.
Right.
Because if we're walking around having imaginary conversations with that family member, for the
Right.
rest of our lives, and not,
Uh-huh.
in a sense, giving them the opportunity to speak for themselves,
Right.
that then we've internalized who they were then or who we thought they were then, and
Right.
we're living with that ghost monster.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we close it, we need to close it.
Mm-hmm.
We need to love ourselves for having done so, and move on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's
I'm just gonna
said and
say to
done.
David, because I can't read the chat very well because I have terrible vision. But David, we are going to skip this break and then we'll just go right to the end. Sorry about that. Someday I'll have better eyesight and I'll be able to write in the chat while we're doing this. Okay. Well, I know that conversation about, I'm joking because I can't see, but there's a lot of pain. It can be a lot of pain in that, but that's also kind of a principle of what you're describing too, of change, impermanence. What is an obstacle in a relationship now may dissipate later, and I'm willing to keep myself open, right, to a point or in a way, but it doesn't mean I have to go and find the stick and poke myself in the eye with it, right? so so in the larger sense then, Craig, we try to keep ourselves calm, manage our intake of media, try not to be clickbaited into overreacting to things and being reactive, try to be sensible and in the sense of being aware of our sensory responses to our friends and loved ones, Facebook friends, etc. All the different ways that we interact with strangers and loved ones about the social world. But then the bigger picture of my sense of my responsibility to the larger world, and that anxiety I think many of us feel of what's the place between, if I'm not, and I don't mean this in a facetious way, but if I'm not out on the barricades in a way, and there have been barricades for months now, right? People are out on the barricades. If I'm not out on the barricades, am I failing? Or depending on what my politics are, if I haven't joined a various kind of domestic terror group, am I somehow failing my principles? I how do I make sense of this, my role in this larger world?
Well, I wish I knew, the answer to that question.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in 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 lieu of knowing the answer to that question, what I try to do is keep asking it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what does that mean? Um, for me, at, in relationship to that sort of bigger picture,
Mm-hmm.
um, the part of what I try to remember is that the imagery from those barricades is itself selective, right?
Mm.
And so, friends in Portland who, would show, take pictures and post them on Facebook of everything sort of proceeding normally,
Right, right,
right?
right.
And so trying to, think that to some degree that sense of the the front, the
Mm-hmm.
literal body to body front, right, is it is partly, right, exaggerated
Mm-hmm.
by the media context that that we're in. So, what's the good of that? The part of the good of that is that it can tell me that there are still possibilities for connection outside of
Mm-hmm.
that context. And what are those? And what are those points of action? Without undermining the good work being done, you know, um, by the moms going out and standing
Right.
in line, right? Or the dads with their leaf blowers blowing the tear gas back
Right.
on the police, right?
Mm-hmm.
And moments like that. We weren't having those here in, where I live.
Right.
right? And so there isn't a barricade for me to go to. So, what am I doing? And
Mm-hmm.
part of that is checking in on students, and part
Ah,
of that is donation work, and
mm-hmm.
trying to do the research on like which organization seems to really be reputable and which
Right.
ones are folks in the community championing over which other ones, and making hard decisions about
Mm-hmm.
that, and giving up. I'm one of them that I've been supporting,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe giving myself too much of a pat on the back for
Oh.
supporting it, right? It's like a sign of my wokeness.
Uh-huh.
And then voices in the community starting to sort of question whether this person was really um, doing the work,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so listening to them rather than my own impulses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are, calling senators.
Right.
There are things that we can do um, that are real and effectual, kind of here in our, where we are. I think the other thing is trying to think creatively. So with
Mm-hmm.
all of these shenanigans in Texas, with the one voting booth
Yes.
drop-off mailbox,
Mm-hmm.
if you will, per county,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been like, well, what do we need? Do we need a change.org petition that
Right.
says, to the Texas Chamber of Commerce that we're not doing business with these companies that we've identified as being in Texas until they get it, there's together and
Right.
provide more voting places, or does that does that just hurt people, and
Right.
and trying to
Right.
kind of ask those kinds of questions, and
Mm-hmm.
so just sort of remaining alive to the possibility of doing things, right,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to think about them critically.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a classic and an incredibly important phrase of doing the work and recognizing that the work is local for the most part. And so to say what is the work that I can do, and again, it's about mindfulness, so I'm always going to say, for me, it's being able to discern when is my stillness, an effort to be calm, to bring peace into my world, and to identify what I can do that's of meaning right in front of me, versus when am I burying my head in the sand, right? When am I, and sometimes I need rest, but that's not necessarily the same as just putting up the barriers and saying I can't take anymore, I can't listen to anymore, I don't know anymore. And that's, I love Twitter because I get all these different points of view, not a wide range of points of view, but different people, I would say, and great variety in my day. But sometimes it's not purposeful to me, it just makes me anxious. So what's something I can do that is useful, that keeps me apprised of what's going on in the world, but actually has a positive impact on the world around me? But it can be hard to discern those things, and that's where I think the mindfulness practice can be so helpful. If we can get a little more quiet, we can get more quiet within, and we can start to see those things and not just feel pulled in so many different directions. So, Craig, final thoughts today?
it's good to see you.
It's good to
Good to
see you too.
be in the world with you.
Same.
And I think if the first thing that I'm going to do is go find the next thing to do.
Me too. Thank you so much for joining me today. I love you. Thank you so much. Okay. Um, Thanks for being with us today on Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. Take care, everybody.